But on a day-to-day basis, you should have plenty of energy to do all the things that you want to do. You get out of bed, you may not love getting out of bed right away, but within 5 to 10 minutes, you should notice that your energy is good, that you have a lot of wakefulness, you're excited to get your day going. You should have great mental clarity, right? You should be able to remember a lot of different things. You should be able to perform at a very high level and whatever it is that, you are doing for a living, or maybe you're a mom or a dad, whatever it is, you should be able to perform at a really high level. You shouldn't be dealing with chronic pain. You should really be focused on your purpose in life and not be distracted by fatigue, by poor mental clarity, by mood issues, anxiety, depression, joint pain. You should be at an optimal weight, and you should be able to go out and exercise when you want to, and also recover from that exercise really well so you can go out and do it again the next day.
Welcome to the Woman's Doctor podcast, helping empower women to embrace their body and soul's full potential. I'm your host, Dr. Trevor Cates, and after 22 years of working with patients, I found the answers to our health struggles are much deeper than most people realize. To help explore this, I'm interviewing colleagues and other wellness experts to get to the root cause so women can realize their true beauty and be informed decision makers for themselves and their loved ones. Inflammation is at the root of most chronic diseases. That includes heart disease, period problems, aches and pains, mood and mental health issues, and skin conditions like acne. Because it's so common, I asked today's guest to come on the podcast to do a deep dive on inflammation. My guest is Dr. David Jockers. You may know of his popular natural health website, drjockers.com, with its over 1 million monthly visitors, or you may have seen him on TV shows like The Dr. Oz Show and Hallmark Home and Family. Dr. Jockers is the author of the best-selling book, The Keto Metabolic Breakthrough and the Fasting Transformation. He is also host of the Dr. Jockers Functional Nutrition podcast. In today's episode, we discuss all things inflammation, where it comes from, symptoms and diseases associated with inflammation, and how we can get to the underlying causes behind inflammation for good. This and much more on today's episode of the Woman's Doctor podcast. Dr. Jockers, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Dr. Cates. Always appreciate you and all the great work you're putting out.
Thank you. We're talking about inflammation today. Such an important thing for so many aspects of our health. And I've seen it as a doctor. I've seen it show up again and again, inflammation creating so many problems. And people oftentimes don't realize all the different ways it can show up. It can show up on our skin. It can show up with hormonal imbalances. So that's what we're diving into today. So what made you so interested in inflammation?
Well, for sure. Well, inflammation, you and I both know, it is really at the root of all chronic degenerative conditions. We're talking about things like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, dementia, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, but also, not only those kinds of conditions, but also conditions that young people are dealing with, like rashes, skin rashes, eczema, rheumatoid arthritis, thyroid issues, right? So all of these types of issues that people are dealing with out there, at the root, we're dealing with inflammation. And inflammation is really a survival mechanism. We know that systemic infections have killed more people throughout the history of mankind than anything else. So our ancestors, when they were out hunting and gathering, or if they were, in a battle or in a war or injured by, some sort of trauma or maybe attacked by an animal, they would have a flesh wound. And typically the flesh wound wasn't what actually killed them. It was actually an infection that got into the wound that spread through their blood system, right, into their lungs, gave them pneumonia, into their nervous system, gave them meningitis, and they would end up dying from the infection. And so our body, the innate intelligence that God created us with, hardwired us, and we adapted to have a defense mechanism for this sort of systemic infection, sepsis. And so that adaptation was inflammation. Inflammation is really a part of what your immune system does. It's an immune system process that helps to break down any sort of pathogens. It's key to the healing process, breaks down damaged tissue, and really initiates the healing process. But inflammation is meant to be very acute, short term, to keep things, to clean up the environment, make sure we're not going to die from an infection, break down damaged cells, and then allow the body to remodel and heal. And the issue we're dealing with today is that we never turn off the inflammatory process. It's on all the time, and it's catabolic. It's breaking down tissues, it's breaking down cells, and we can live a long time with chronic inflammation. However, it creates a lot of suffering, a lot of unnecessary suffering, a lot of tissue breakdown, and a lot of disease buildup in our body, whether it's, joint pain, whether it's inflammation that's affecting our brain, impacting our mood. So it can cause things like anxiety, depression, and then long-term, it can cause memory problems, Alzheimer's, dementia, right? Damaging our heart, causing high blood pressure with our cardiovascular system, ultimately leading to congestive heart failure, impacting our thyroid, causing, obviously hypothyroidism or autoimmunity to our thyroid, Hashimoto's thyroiditis or Graves' disease. I mean, any number of conditions out there. It's the process started as a survival mechanism. It started for our own benefit, but it never got turned off. Ultimately, it leads to organ and gland failure in our system.
Right. And we oftentimes see inflammation show up. We see it with skin problems like eczema, acne, all kinds of skin problems, but we also notice it as pain. A lot of my patients will talk about chronic pain and they don't know. They're like, I don't know. I go to see my doctor and they say there's nothing wrong with me, that everything's fine, but I'm in this chronic pain, or just these chronic issues where, your labs look normal. I'm using air quotes here for people listening. But you just know something's not right. And inflammation is one of those things that can really creep up on you. And if you don't address it, it can just continue to show up in your health in other ways. So like, showing up as eczema, and then people use topical steroids just to suppress it, but they're not addressing the underlying causes of that inflammation. And so then it'll show up in their health in other ways, maybe asthma, maybe autoimmune disease, heart disease, a lot of other things can happen, hormonal imbalance, endometriosis, or you name it, a lot of different things can happen. And so what are some of the root causes behind inflammation? I mean, I talk about inflammation as being a root cause, but there's actually layers under inflammation that there are root causes behind it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, at the root of chronic inflammation, number one is going to be leaky gut. And so our gut lining is only one cell wall, and it's connected together. All these cells are connected together by these tight junctions that are holding it together. And the reason why it's only one cell wall is because our ancestors had limited access to food. So they would go through a lot of periods of time of famine. So whenever they found food, they really needed to make sure that the nutrients from that food were able to easily cross from the barrier of the gut right into the circulatory system. And so that way we're able to get nutrients to the cells. However, today we have, we're able to easily eat, 3-4 plus meals a day. Food is easy to access. So we're constantly eating. We're not going through those times of famine. And so we're overwhelming that gut lining, and we're eating foods that are very, very inflammatory, things that you talk about all the time, gluten and dairy and processed foods and processed sugars that really drive up inflammation, create imbalances in our microbiome, and they end up leading to inflammation that's tearing the gut lining. And now when the gut lining opens up, large undigested proteins get through the gut lining and into the bloodstream, as well as bacteria, yeast, different microorganisms. And when they get into the bloodstream, the immune system is trained, our brain is trained to sense whenever there's large abnormal proteins, a certain threshold of those, to drive up inflammation. Again, it's a protective mechanism. And so once it senses that, it drives up inflammation in the system. And if we're constantly eating and every single meal we eat, we're not digesting it well, and now large proteins are getting into the bloodstream, bacteria are getting into the bloodstream, we just continually promote that inflammatory process. And so this is at the root, is leaky gut, but there are other factors as well. Blood sugar imbalances. When we're eating foods that are very high in starch and sugar, we're causing blood sugar imbalances. When blood sugar goes way up, we get this big release of insulin, which drives the blood sugar down. And that's very stressful on the body. We end up releasing a lot of glucocorticoids because we're constantly driving blood sugar up and down. And that ends up like things like cortisol and epinephrine, and they end up causing more laxity in the gut lining, right? So they create more fragile gut lining, which makes it, more permeable. And again, we get that same issue with leaky gut. So blood sugar imbalances are a major factor with leaky gut. On top of that, when we have high blood sugar, the sugar molecules themselves will actually bind to proteins in our bloodstream and create something called an advanced glycolytic end product. And these AGEs, or advanced glycolytic end products, create a lot of oxidative stress in our system. So they create, it's almost like a rusting effect, an internal rusting or browning effect that damages the endothelial lining of our blood vessels. It's like shrapnel going through our kidneys. You think about somebody with uncontrolled diabetes, where do they end up? They actually don't die from diabetes. They end up dying because they have kidney failure, or they have congestive heart failure, or they have issues with their nervous system, like, for example, optic neuritis or peripheral neuropathy, because the AGEs will damage the nervous system. And so that's a major driver of inflammation, is blood sugar imbalances and insulin resistance. So we've really got to address that. A couple other factors, toxins, we have more chemicals coming into our bodies now than ever before. And that's coming from our air, our water, and our food. And also the things we put on our skin, which I know you talk a lot about, our cosmetics, right? Moisturizers, cleaners, things like that. We're constantly being bombarded by chemical toxins that are driving up inflammation. We also have things that maybe in our house that we're breathing in, right? We might have formaldehyde and different things like that coming off of some of our furniture, or mycotoxins and mold that's in our walls, that's seeping through our walls that we're breathing in. These things drive up inflammation. And then we also have infections, right? A lot of people are dealing with chronic underlying infections, and these could be viral infections. We're just coming out of the COVID pandemic, and a lot of people have long haulers syndrome or post-viral syndrome. And the virus caused a lot of damage and really upregulated inflammatory processes, activated something called the inflammasome in the body, which is kind of an inflammation amplifier, just driving up inflammation. And even though they're not testing positive for the virus, they still have all their inflammatory systems ramped up. And so they're feeling the effects of that. You also have gut infections, parasites, bacterial infections in the gut, things like H. pylori, which is a bacteria that is a very, very common infection in the stomach that shuts down stomach acid production. So infections are a major factor. And then, beyond that, we have to look at chronic stress and poor sleep, just really, poor lifestyle. A lot of people are dealing with trauma, for example, right? Emotional trauma, physical trauma. Maybe they were abused in their childhood. They haven't been able to overcome that, or they're in an abusive relationship. So all that stress is really driving up more inflammation in the system. It tells the body. So when we're under chronic stress, our body, our ancestors, when they were under a lot of stress, oftentimes it resulted in some sort of a flesh wound, right? Like when they were under stress, maybe they were being attacked by somebody who cut them open with a spear, or they were being attacked by an animal or something like that. Yeah. And so the body is primed. When we're under a lot of stress, the body says, okay, we need to get ready. We could have a big flesh wound at any time. We need to make sure we don't die from an infection. So we're going to drive up inflammation. So if you've been, if you have post-traumatic stress, if you're under a lot of trauma, emotional stress, that's driving up inflammation. If you're not sleeping well at night, that's almost like being under, in a state of trauma, because that's really when you heal and rebuild. And so a lot of people are just not sleeping well. So those are the major factors. Those things are really the major factors that are driving up inflammation in the body.
Yeah, absolutely. So what can we do about it? I mean, obviously inflammation is a huge problem. What are labs we can do and treatments?
Yeah, some of the best labs that I like to look at, C-reactive protein, high sensitivity C-reactive protein is a good marker looking at inflammation. It doesn't catch it on everybody. I've seen a lot of people that are dealing with chronic inflammation that still have low HSCRP. But in general, we like to see that HSCRP under 1 for sure, and really as low as possible. I mean, if we can get it under 0.5, that's great. It's a great sign. But again, that's not the only marker. There's other things like ESR, the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, how much the blood is kind of coagulating together. And we like to see that under 10 millimeters per hour, right? So the blood is, not sticking together. So that's another thing that we can easily look at. I also look at fasting insulin. Fasting insulin is a really great marker along with hemoglobin A1C. And a lot of times your doctors will run hemoglobin A1C, which is really looking at the glycation process. We talked about the AGEs, the advanced glycation end products. So we measure that off of the hemoglobin A1C, right? If you're up over, I think it's up over 6.5, you're diagnosed as diabetes, but that's really high. Like I like to see it 5.2 or less, right? Really, if we can get it 5 or less, that is great. That's a sign that we don't have a lot of that browning effect inside of our bloodstream. We're clearing our blood sugar really well. And we pair that with your insulin levels, your fasting insulin. So you should be able to fast, you should fast overnight, like a 12, maybe 14-hour fast, and then get your blood drawn. And that's kind of the most accurate way to do it. And your insulin levels, I like to see under 6, right? You're always going to have some insulin unless you're, not producing it at all. So I like to see it roughly between 2 and 6. If it's up over that, which I see so commonly, it's a sign your body's producing a lot of insulin. You're not responding as well to the message of insulin, which is to take sugar out of the bloodstream and put it into the cells. And if you're not responding well to that message, that's a sign of inflammation in the system. And when insulin is elevated, you're not going to be able to burn fat for fuel, right? You can't burn fat effectively. So you're metabolically inflexible. You're stuck in sugar burning mode. And when you're burning sugar for fuel, you're producing a lot of oxidative stress. Sugar, although a quick energy source and a necessary energy source, is also a very dirty energy source. When we burn sugar as a fuel source, we produce things like lactic acid and a whole lot of oxidative stress, a whole lot of free radicals. And that's great if we're exercising, like if we're doing that just for a short period of time, because we'll adapt, we'll get stronger, we'll actually build more endogenous antioxidant defense systems. And that's one of the great reasons why exercise is so good for us. But when we're doing that all day long, we're driving up more oxidative stress, more inflammation in our body, causing a lot of unwanted problems. So looking at that fasting insulin, looking at hemoglobin A1C, those are great markers. I can go into a lot more, but I know just for time purposes, we'll leave that for the summit.
Right. Awesome. So you mentioned your summit. Tell everybody about the inflammation summit.
Yes, absolutely. And, I forgot to answer the second part of your question there.
Yeah, right.
Which was things we can do, right? Well, if you listen to Dr. Cates' podcast, I'm sure she's going over things every day that you can do to help keep inflammation under control. Really prioritize good quality sleep. Sleep hygiene is so critical. And I know you talk a lot about that, keeping your stress under control, anti-inflammatory nutrition plan, things like intermittent fasting, which is something I'm really passionate about, is, in my opinion, it's the most ancient. All of our ancestors did it because, again, they went through a lot of times of famine. This was a normal process that all humans went through because we didn't have refrigerators and pantries. And so basically the way that we practice it today, because we do have, full refrigerators and pantries, food, we have plenty of food. The way we practice it now is really just condensing our eating window, right? And so we condense our eating window. So instead of eating from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, you compress it into, let's say, 8 hours, right? And you eat from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. or something like that. That alone will reduce your insulin levels, your fasting insulin levels, your blood sugar. It will help reduce inflammation. There's a lot of great benefits to it. And there's a lot of different strategies that we can use with fasting. I talk about it in the summit. I also have a great book on it. But that's a great strategy. So good nutrition, intermittent fasting, keeping stress under control, regular exercise, getting sun exposure on a regular basis. So powerful. We know about vitamin D, but also biophotons that help drive up our mitochondria. Really powerful. There's also some advanced strategies, things like infrared sauna, right? And using an infrared sauna. But we go through all of this in the summit. We have some really in-depth trainings where you get a chance to understand all these different mechanisms. I know you're one of the great guests. We talk a lot about skin inflammation. So if you're dealing with, acne, rashes, age spots, things like that, you'll definitely want to check out the masterclass that you put on with me on that particular topic. But it's really powerful. We have 36 experts talking about all these different areas, things that you can do to help reduce inflammation in different regions of your body. So if you're dealing with more brain inflammation, cardiovascular inflammation, skin inflammation, depending on, where your major focal point is, you can really focus in on those presentations. Just a really, really great overall masterclass on inflammation. So you understand all the components of it, lab tests, to look for, so you can really measure. I actually go through my top 12 labs. I have a presentation on that in the summit. and then, really getting to the root causes and getting those things addressed.
Yeah, I think it's so important for more people to know about their labs because there's so many doctors that won't run things just because they don't understand. And conventional doctors don't really have a whole lot of tools in their tool belt to address things like, if a high sensitivity CRP is off, but not, or insulin it's not showing that they're diabetic, but it's not optimal, right? So they're not really looking for that. So I think it's so important for people for everyone to have an understanding of labs and what to ask your doctor for, especially if you don't have a functional medicine doctor or a naturopathic doctor like us to work with. So to be able to go back to your doctor and say, hey, can you run this for me? And at least you get a little bit more information on your labs. And then, hey, can I get a copy of my lab results rather than just your doctor saying, oh, they're normal. You just get a copy of them so that you can look at those specific ranges like Dr. Jockers talking about. And I'm sure you talk more about in your summit. So that's really great. I mean, I think it's so important for people to be empowered with this information. And, you talked some about intermittent fasting, and I think it's really interesting. Can you touch a little bit more on why that seems to be so helpful?
For sure. Well, fasting. So basically your body's going to be either in a fed state or a fasted state. When you're in a fed state, your insulin levels are higher. And there's some benefit to that. Insulin helps drive cell division. It drives growth. Insulin tells the body to grow and to store, right? And we need that from time to time. And especially if we're young and we're growing quickly, or a pregnant woman or something like that, newborn infant. However, most adults really need to keep that fed state under control. And that's where we get these amazing benefits when we're in the state of famine, or, if we go on a certain period of time without food. And that's when our body really focuses on healing and repairing. So we shut down inflammatory processes. In fact, intermittent fasting, when we're doing that, we are starting to tell our body, okay, we're going periods of time without, calories coming in. We're not able to burn sugar to produce enough energy. So now we need to dip in and burn our own body fat. We start burning our own body fat as an energy source, and we lower our insulin levels. And then our body says, okay, we need some great energy for our brain, because our brain can run off of sugar and it can run off something else called ketones, but fatty acids can't cross the blood-brain barrier. And so the liver starts converting fatty acids into this smaller water-soluble molecule called ketones. Ketones cross in the blood-brain barrier. And when ketones are elevated in our bloodstream, they shut down the inflammation amplifying cycles, the inflammasome in our body. So they shut it down in the brain, they shut it down throughout the systems of our body. So it's really powerful as far as an anti-inflammatory effect. Fasting, when we're in that state and we get insulin levels down, also activates something called autophagy, where our body, it's a self-repair process where our body will break down older, damaged, what we call senescent cells and cellular organelles, right? So within the cells, we have things like the mitochondria, which produce the energy for the cell. But these mitochondria become damaged from metabolic stress and oxidative stress. And if we don't get rid of the damaged mitochondria, they just continue to sputter around, producing less than optimal energy. And they become very metabolically inflexible. So they're only good at burning sugar, for example. They can't burn fat as an energy source. And so they become less functional, and the cell itself loses its resiliency. And so when we go through this period of famine, it turns on an internal signal within these cells to get rid of these senescent mitochondria, these aged mitochondria, and to actually take the raw materials, the things, it's like recycling it. It's like trading in an old damaged car, taking the components that we can reuse, taking those and actually rebuilding a new, healthy, stress-resilient mitochondria. So our body actually renews itself from the inside out when we're going through this period of famine. So a lot of powerful benefits. And I go through a lot more detail. Actually, we talk a lot about how intermittent fasting actually reshapes the gut microbiome, which is a really powerful science as well. So many different ways, but it's ancient, inexpensive, and powerful natural medicine, just practicing intermittent fasting. So really good stuff.
Great. So just before we wrap up, can you just give a quick picture of what it looks like to not have all that inflammation in the body? Because I think we talk so much about what it looks like when you have inflammation, but sometimes people forget about what it's like to actually have an optimally functioning body.
Yeah, for sure. Well, all of us are dealing with inflammation. So, all of us have to work on keeping it at bay. Even if you feel like you're thriving in life, you still need to really focus on keeping inflammation under control. But on a day-to-day basis, you should have plenty of energy to do all the things that you want to do. You get out of bed, you may not love getting out of bed right away, but within 5 to 10 minutes, you should notice that your energy is good, that you have a lot of wakefulness, you're excited to get your day going. You should have great mental clarity, right? You should be able to remember a lot of different things. You should be able to perform at a very high level and whatever it is that, you are doing for a living, or maybe you're a mom or a dad, whatever it is, you should be able to perform at a really high level. You shouldn't be dealing with chronic pain. You should really be focused on your purpose in life and not be distracted by fatigue, by poor mental clarity, by mood issues, anxiety, depression, joint pain. You should be at an optimal weight, and you should be able to go out and exercise when you want to, and also recover from that exercise really well so you can go out and do it again the next day. These are all components that show that, hey, your inflammation is under control. And from a skin perspective, you should have healthy skin, right? You shouldn't have acne, rashes, eczema, right? You should be keeping the aging process under control. So, like somebody like you, Dr. Cates, that, looks like you're 25 years old, right? I don't even know how old you are, but
49.
Yeah. So 49 and look like you're 25. That's pretty good, right? Keeping inflammation under control with your skin. So this is, you should have a good appearance, right? And so those are all signs that you're keeping inflammation under control and your mitochondria are functioning at a really high level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add to that for women, of course, and a lot of these hormonal issues, especially things like endometriosis and mood issues. I mean, we haven't really even talked that much about how inflammation plays a role in the brain and our mood, like memory, cognition, ups and downs in your mood, PMS, all of these things that are related to our hormones can go back to inflammation. When inflammation is high, it can throw our hormones off. So Dr. Jockers, thank you so much for joining us. And we will have a link to the Inflammation Summit up so people can join you. And any last thing you want to end with?
Yeah, I would just like to inspire the audience to know that your body can heal. You have an innate intelligence that God put within you that's continually working on your behalf, trying to heal and repair you. And what you got to do is just align your body with the right principles, and your body can heal itself.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Woman's Doctor podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with the women in your life. And to learn all about balancing hormones, join us for the Hormones, Health, and Harmony docuseries at thewomansdoctor.com.